Welcome to the Fastpitch Zone answer session with Amanda Scarborough. Amanda is an ESPN analyst, two-time All-American, Big 12 Pitcher of the Year, and played in 2 College World Series with Texas A&M. Amanda is also the founder of the Pitching Angel, which gives online training for pitching mechanics, training, and the mental performance of a pitcher. I'm Jesse Rosenhahn, owner of Buffalo's Elite Sports Training and a private pitching instructor in Buffalo, New York. Woohoo! Amanda, can you give us a background of how you grew up playing softball, like where you came from?
Yeah, so I grew up in Houston, Texas. I am a Texan girl. I started playing softball when I was about 6 years old, just in a local league called Oaks Dad's Club that's right there in Houston. Started playing travel ball when I was about 12 years old, and then went to high school north of Houston in Magnolia, Texas at Magnolia High School. Played travel ball for Impact Gold and also Texas Storm at the time, Gold, and then went on to play at Texas A&M for 4 years, where I got a chance to play in 2 Women's College World Series, then coached at A&M for 2 years. And then after that, decided that I just wanted to be able to do my own thing and be my own type of coach instead of coaching out of college. And so then decided to give lessons and do clinics and start an online social media page, which at the time just wasn't very big. And now here we are. And I also do ESPN games for the college softball season, including the Women's College World Series, and started doing that in 2015. The World Series, that is.
Awesome. Yesterday, you opened up your enrollment into your Foundation Maximizer course. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So talked about how, I've been pitching since I was 8 years old, and then pitched all the way until I was 22 at A&M. And a big reason why I wanted my first online training to be all about the foundation, just the fundamentals, the core mechanics of pitching, was because of maybe a slow motion video that quite a few people have seen. There's been over 1 million people who have watched it on YouTube that I made, I think in around the year 2012. And it got so much good feedback and so many questions about it at the time. I'm like, you know what, maybe I'm onto something here with some efficient mechanics that I didn't ever really know that I had when I was growing up. Nobody had pointed out to me. I just worked really hard and had great coaches. So I wanted to be able to put all my training from my coaches and everything that I had learned, past playing, into a course that really focused on the foundation, whether you are a more advanced pitcher, intermediate, or beginner, a place that you can learn about the foundation with clear mechanics, make it simple, have drills and guidance, and somebody to me, aka your coach, help you for about 6 weeks of training. Because here's the thing, Jesse, your foundation is just so important to continue to build on, just like the foundation of a house, to where if the foundation of a house is broke, then that house is going to start to crumble a lot earlier than if a house had a really, really strong foundation. So if you want more speed, more accuracy, more consistency, and even more confidence, I know that it starts with your foundation and your mechanics, no matter how old you are. So I created a course for it that people from literally all over the world end up taking and being a part of.
I think one of the most common posts you see out there are people posting to pages like the Fastpitch Zone. They'll post a video of their daughter and be like, where do I start? We're a beginner. Where do we start? Where do we start? And I think that's a good place. Like, you want to start with the foundation, with the mechanics. And obviously, if they don't know who's around them, going to an online course like you have is probably perfect for them, starting as a beginner and not knowing what to do. And just a side note, that video that you posted back in 2012, and I bought the power drive and I looked at your video, and I had a screen next to my station where I was teaching pitchers, and we were watching the video, and it actually opened my eyes to everything. I sat there. It was like the first time I think we saw a pitcher in slow motion and like 1,000 frames per second, where it was always blurred on TV and VHS tapes that we're using. Like, it was always blurred. So it was like this most amazing video that I think we have ever come across. That really, looking back, like, your mechanics in that video were just what I think are spot on. Like, your drive on there, it looks perfect. And I think you even mentioned in a post yesterday talking about your drive and not leaping or not curl hopping and how that's so misinterpreted. But in that video, you perfectly push off that power drive and you just see that nice smooth drag going off away from the rubber on that.
Thank
So I did
you.
love that video.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we have questions from the audience of the Fastpitch Zone, and I'll get to those. They submitted some questions. I did have some questions of myself. So my first one was, what is the biggest thing you learned when transitioning from a player to a pitching coach?
Oh, that is a great question. I think that in that transition from going from player to coach, I realized that not everything I think that I thought I did was how I would actually coach someone to do it. So like, I think oftentimes as a player, you think you do one thing, but then when you go to coach somebody else or tell somebody else how to do it, whether it's a coach or an adult or a pitcher, it's not always the same thing. So, I think just being able to find those areas of like what an actual finish should look like, and what my body actually does do whenever my front foot, stride foot hits the ground, and where the angle that my hips are at. So, you always hear those phrases like stay open at release and do this at your release. And those are just phrases that your coaches told you to make adjustments when you were a player. It's not things that actually happen in the middle of a pitch. So it's being able to decipher as a coach what actually happens versus what your coaches were telling you in order to try to make quick adjustments, which we do all the time as coaches, is say certain things to try to get pitchers in certain positions to get them to feel something to get them in a better spot.
Yeah, like I always say, there's a difference between cue words and the actual mechanic that you want you to do. And sometimes what I want you to do is not what I'm cueing you to do, because sometimes you got to over exaggerate or under exaggerate something. So I would say, like, sometimes there are cue words and it's not actually what you do, but it worked. Sometimes it worked for pitchers for a long time. But I think you're right. As like a pitching coach, you should look at what you probably actually do. And now that we have the resources with iPhones and slow motion, it's so easy to have it at our hands nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which brings me to my next question. What do you think is the most common thing to correct in pitchers?
I think the most common thing to correct, I always look to the hips and below. So something from the ground up. And I think that any type of drag mistakes are areas that I'm going to look toward to being one of the most important mechanics to be able to tweak and fix, whether you have an anchor drag, whether you leap, or whether you replant. There are a million different reasons too for why, you don't want to replant. One of them, of course, being the fact that you're likely going to get called for an illegal pitch, and you don't want to have to get stuck whenever you are 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, having to relearn your mechanics and the right way or the legal way to drag. Now, whether that might change years from now to where everybody can have 2 feet off the ground, like the international rules, it's to be seen. But as of right now, that's not the case. And learning how to drag correctly, I mean, mechanics work from the ground up, so from your feet up. And so learning how to drag correctly is definitely, in my opinion, the most important thing and the biggest area of improvement for a lot of pitchers.
I agree. What do you think is the most mistaught mechanic, in your opinion, amongst like players that you get and you think that they were taught differently than what you teach?
Yeah, I think of that. I'm gonna put on my blue light glass. Oh, well, you can't see my eyes. I just am on the screen so much. I usually do some blue light glasses because they help my eyes. I think still it's hello elbow. I just don't know why we're still putting so much emphasis on it. I get that maybe why it used to have a rhyme or reason for a coach to make it a point of emphasis to finish your pitch. But I think that now, to your point, with all the slow motion video that we have and knowledge that we have about how the body works, I don't know why so many coaches are still putting such a big emphasis on that and why it's still around. So that's probably the biggest one for me. And just any type of like forced finish is what I call it. So not just saying that it's a hello elbow, but there's like the forearm fire, which, to be honest, I haven't seen forearm fire in a lot of comments lately. Maybe it's going out of style. Like now that I just talk about it right now, like even on Fastpitch Zone or my own page, like I haven't seen those two words as much, but I just don't really like any type of forced finish. I want to be able to create natural movements with the body, with leg drive, as well as release and finish.
Yeah, you're right. I actually haven't remembered seeing that in a lot of posts lately. So that's interesting. Um, all right. Who do you think is currently the best pitcher in the world?
Man, it has Wayno retired yet? Like, is that official? Is she still like a present?
Let's say nobody's retired, and let's say this is like a week ago or 2 weeks ago.
I know. I would really have to go with her, Jesse. Like, I don't know how I can pick anybody else. When she's won 2 gold medals, and the most recent 2 gold medals in our sport, against us, against the United States. So I would pick her. And then the one from the United States, who I feel like is just such a close second, is Monica Abbott. I love Kat too. We're close friends, her playing at Texas and me at A&M, and us both being from the Houston area. And I just think that her pitching and her movement is such a work of art. But when you look at like what Monica has done recently in Japan, and then also in the Olympics, and again, Kat was great too. I feel like all three of those are just, they're so good in their own unique ways. And a lot of fun to watch, and two lefties too with Monica and Kat.
I even think, in my opinion, I didn't think that Yukiko was probably in her, she's obviously not in her prime, and I don't think she was probably throwing as good as she used to, which brings me to my next question. Do you think Yukiko has actually thrown 80 miles an hour, as her Wikipedia page says?
So that's so interesting. As soon as I knew that we might be talking about her today, I read that, and I immediately texted Michelle Smith, because I had not personally heard that, and I wanted to be knowledgeable coming on here and talking to you, like if that was an actual thing or not. And I knew that Michelle would know if she had hit 80 miles an hour, since she played so many years in Japan and is friends with her. And she said no, that she's not thrown 80 miles an hour, and that they may have said 80 miles an hour in that Olympic game, but she thinks because 80 kilometers an hour is 50 miles per hour for her changeup, that maybe there was some type of what's the word for it? Like whenever you're translating numbers or conversion. Like, yeah, like some conversion confusion. But she said she threw like low 70s, like legit low 70s, but never have hit 80. So have good inside information on that's not true.
Okay. Yeah, when I've actually checked our Wikipedia page a couple times, because I run a webinar, and at one point it said 75, and I went back to double check it, and that's where I saw 80. So that's where it came up, and I feel like that TV announcer probably pulled it from there as well, because that was on there before he said that. So that was my guess.
Okay.
So it definitely had changed at some point. All right, we're going to get to some questions from the audience, and this one was from Melissa Brown. She said, how do you keep yourself from comparing your abilities to others?
Yeah, I think that is such an important thing to incorporate into your training every single day, and something that pitchers, myself included, and just us in life, should probably work on every day, to focus on all the things that we can control and give our all to, and things that we know that are 100% in our control, and not focusing on anybody else. So within your training, finding ways to compare you versus not doing any type of comparing. Then I think that when you leave it open for, like, you just go out and practice and have no goals, no points of emphasis, no focuses, then it's really easy, because you're not locked into what you're doing, to look to see what other people are doing and think, oh, okay, well, I didn't give any goals or challenges to myself. So what was this person doing? How can I challenge myself against them? And that's what usually brings us down a little bit whenever we're comparing ourselves to others. But I think finding different ways within your training to beat your own goals and to become your best and control everything that you can along the way.
All right. Next question was from Steve Sable. He said, what did you do to perfect your great drive off? Now, mind you, what you probably teach now might be different than what you probably learned. So I guess he's asking, what did you actually do when you were growing up to work on your drive?
Yeah. So in thinking about that, I did a lot of long toss and a lot of band work. So a lot of resistance work. And just always having a focus for a really quick, what I call backside that I still teach. So a lot of emphasis on a quick backside. So your drag leg with how it starts to how it finishes, really being able to accelerate your back knee to your front knee through your pitch. Um, and I talked about this last night in my own training this morning, but gliding off. So whenever your arms, sorry in advance if my dog is about to bark. Whenever your arms go forward, that your drag needs to start going forward too. I think that a lot of people don't do that. I think that they stay put on the pitching rubber and their arms are moving forward, but their legs aren't coming with it. And so to get that extra bit of drive to instantly have everything working together instead of arms going and legs staying back, being able to use your entire body from the very beginning.
Right. Good answers. Sean O'Brien says, what were your speeds at your different age levels? Like if you remember, if you got radared at different, like if you were at, a certain speed at 10U versus 12U versus 14U.
Yeah, I wish, and I have some papers that I had full intention of going back on to remember my like earlier on speeds basically in middle school, but I do know my high school speeds because every year it got about 2 miles an hour faster. So I think as a freshman, it was 62, sophomore 64, junior 66, senior 68 was about my average speed. And then by the time that I was getting to college, hitting 69, 70 because I was stronger and I still had the mechanics that I had, but going to the weight room all the time helped me increase that. So I wish that I had my middle school speeds, but definitely it was lower. I would say I hit 60 probably like at some point late in 8th grade, I would want to say, or just in the middle of 8th grade. And then it progressively got more and more and more over time. And again, Jesse, that's a big reason why I love to focus on such strong foundation, because without my foundation, I would not have been having that gradual increase of speed even late in my career. So a strong foundation that you build as a young pitcher not only pays off when you are 10, 11, 12 years old, but it's something that can continue to pay off throughout your entire journey.
Yeah, I would say like some people who don't work on that foundation all of a sudden plateau, and then they don't understand why. It's because they never fixed the stuff 5 years ago, and now it's going to be harder to fix it. So they struggle to pick up, even 1 mile an hour here and there, and they wonder why they get stuck.
You said it.
All right. All right. Next question from Crystal Brown herself, the lady who put this all together. How did you get your start in broadcasting?
Yeah, so that's a really fun story because I think a lot of people, especially like in our world and Fastpitch Zone and on my Facebook page, see me as Amanda the pitcher and not so much Amanda the broadcaster. But I got a call the year after I got done playing in 2009 from who is now my boss and was my boss then too. But her name's Mega Ronowitz, who she's like the head of ESPN softball. She just randomly called me and asked me if I wanted to call a super regional. And so I, of course, said yes. I was a volunteer coach at the time, and A&M wasn't very good that year. And so I knew that we wouldn't make it to super regionals because I just had a bit of a hunch that we wouldn't. And so I committed to doing it. And that was the first games that I ever got to call was Missouri at UCLA super regional in 2009, and Missouri beat them to go to the Women's College World Series. So it started with me just doing basically like a super regional every year to growing to have more and more and more games. But Crystal, I think a big answer to that too is my boss, who I told you about, Meg. She was a producer for a game or two that I had played in that she had produced. And so she would come in and, they would grab a couple of players to talk to with the talent and the people who were calling the games. And I was usually one of those players that they would talk to. And without even knowing it, I was making an impression on her of just like, oh, well, she's kind of well-spoken, articulate about the sport. So I'm going to keep her in the back of my mind and maybe she'll want to call games. And so fast forward to 2021, going from just calling a super regional and having no idea that somebody was listening to me talk about the sport to now calling the Women's College World Series. It's been quite a journey. Pretty awesome.
You never know who you're going to make an impression with, down the line.
Exactly.
You never know who's watching your game, so always be on your
Exactly.
best behavior. And Crystal also asked, what was the best behind the scene moment at the Women's College World Series?
I think everything that we did on 7 Innings Live, so that was an alternate broadcast during the national championship game that we had on ESPNU with myself and Kayla Bro and Courtney Lyle and missing one person because I just can't think of it at the time. I'm just blanking, but we just had so many fun moments of just being able to be a fan of the game and just hang out and go off of the main broadcast that a lot of you guys probably watched and millions of people watched, but just to get to be a fan because I don't get to ever really do that. So it's a little bit more behind the scenes, but also like on camera, but just in between innings, like when we go to commercial, I'll be like, this is just so cool to get to watch the game and like from a different perspective and still be a fan and have fun with it and just joke around and get to just be like you guys, like watching the game instead of just calling it.
Well, I was standing on top of my couch cheering a lot, so I don't know if you're watching it like, especially when you go for that ball. And the last question from Crystal: how did it differ from being a player to announcing?
I think that I'm just a lot more aware at like what's at stake. I feel like I'm a lot more like a parent. Like I get more nervous, like you parents will get in the middle of a game. And so now that I'm on the outside, like I just even more so, I feel every emotion. And I was probably feeling it as a player too, but your adrenaline is running, so you don't actually really realize it. But now calling the games, it's like all of that comes to the surface and I get to talk about it in a way that I wouldn't necessarily get to talk about it like in the middle of a game as a player. So that's probably the biggest thing, is just like feeling more nervous, feeling more excited, if that's even possible, than as a player, but it just kind of feels like it. But just feeling all those emotions even more than an actual player on the field, like a parent.
Next question from Dave McCracken. He's a common poster in the Fastpitch Zone. What was your pitch strategy against lefty slappers?
Yeah. So so I had a really great screwball and a great drop ball that I mostly relied on within my career. So in like an 0-2 count, I think there was a question probably from him that had said that I would usually try to expand the zone with a screwball and try to get them to swing through it and pulling out their front shoulder. But also I loved throwing an off-speed pitch or a changeup like in the dirt on 0-2. And I really felt like it got slappers more times than not out on their front foot. Of course, you can't hang it because that's going to be a pitch that they'll be able to hang on to with their barrel control and hit. But throwing it just right out in front of home plate and just getting it to dive down, it usually gets them to lunge forward towards it more times than not.
Yeah, somebody did, I mean, not just on lefty slappers, but Aubrey and Lindsay asked, what's your favorite pitch to throw on just 0-2 count? So right,
Okay.
what's your
I was
righty
combining. Yeah. I would love a good drop ball, like drop ball outside, drop ball inside. That was usually my out pitch, try to get a ground ball out. That expanded the zone a little bit more. That's more like ankle high, starts at the knees, breaks to the ankles, trying to get either a swing and miss or just to get a ground ball out.
Excellent. Yeah, keep it down low. Always better than going out of the park on accident when you have 2 strikes on the batter.
Always.
Ken Berggren says, on a rise ball, do you have a preference? Obviously 6-12 spin, do you allow for bullet spin, or is it something in between?
Yeah. So as a player, I definitely didn't have great 6-12 spin. Mine would have probably been more bullet spin, I guess I would say. I just didn't pay so much. It's so sad. I just didn't pay close attention to it the way I do with my drop and my screwball. It was just not a great pitch for me. But now that I see so many just incredible college pitchers pitch, I love the 6-12 spin that also serves as a third speed. Like, I feel like that is such an effective pitch, like what Valerie Cagle throws, what Kelly Barnhill threw when she was at Florida. Like, I love that like off speed rise ball that has incredible 6-12 spin, and it just fools hitters. It completely fools them. So that's probably the one that I would pick now, even though I think it's the hardest one to throw because it has all that spin to it and it has to have perfect spin in order to create that you want to say break. I know that there's going to be people, the rise ball doesn't break, but I'm going to say break because I don't care. But the break up, like you see that and it's so deceptive.
I agree. And so, I mean, going to that point, and I know you kind of said it in there, but to say it out loud to people maybe that don't know, you would say that true spin rise ball is generally slower than a bullet spinning rise ball. And I don't know if you'd want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, it is. And I'm not like a scientist over here, Jesse. Like I can't tell you what gravity is doing and the equations that I know that people pull out of like people are just really smart and they're able to figure out why and the science behind it. But for sure, when there is a pitch going at 612 spin that is true backspin, even though a pitcher is trying to throw it really hard, it just has all that spin to it and is able to still slow it down a bit and still full hitters. So, I mean, it'd be really cool to have one that was a little bit more up and in on the hands without true spin and also be able to have that 612 spin that again can serve as that third speed that I feel like we're seeing so much in our sport that is really important to have your fastball or fastest pitch speed, an off speed pitch, and then a changeup that's even slower.
Right. Ken Berggren also asked, in your drive mechanics, do you teach more of a bow or squat or more upright? So I think he's like, well, at least in your power drive video, you had more of a lean or an H looking form as opposed to like a newer method you're seeing where like the knees are bent and then pushing out of the drive.
Yeah, so I would do not what actually happens in my video. I would not teach my windup. I know that a lot of girls emulate it, and I've said this before. Like, I wish that I could go back and change it so that girls won't emulate my windup. But unfortunately, that is how I threw. I mean, like that's how I pitched in college, right? So it's like, hey, well, was kind of successful because I was a 2-time All-American, so it kind of worked. But I wouldn't necessarily teach that. So yeah, the bow or like the other one where you're like a little bit more upright with your chest, but still really feeling your legs and bottom half, like getting into it. That's what I would teach because it will help girls stay taller.
Right. Jamie Muller says, what do you think shorter pitchers need to work on more than taller pitchers? I think she's calling you short.
I think I get called that a lot too. And that's another thing that I didn't know about myself. Like all growing up, I had nobody told me, Jesse, in high school and college that I was short. Like that's just such a thing now. And I hate it for shorter pitchers that they get called out and that it's like a thing that you look for taller pitchers. But just legs, perfect leg drive and being able to use everything that your hips and below is going to give you and being able to sequence it. So getting your hips, being able to connect with your arms and get everything timed up and working together. That's going to be the absolute best way. And you're definitely not going to do it by leaning, by pushing the ball, but being able to create a really good whip and sequence up your lower half with your upper half with great leg drive mechanics. I mean, that's really going to be what it takes.
Good. And speaking of the whip, that's our next question from Casey Meyer. What is the most important thing to remember when trying to create arm whip in kids?
Body positioning is more key than just focusing on the whip. So like you can say all day, like whip, whip, whip. But if a person is more leaning forward with their body, then a whip is going to be impossible. So again, focusing on bottom half. That's why I keep going back to it, focusing on bottom half mechanics, because that's going to get more of your chin over your belly button or being a little bit more back. I'd rather see a pitcher a little bit back than a little bit forward because it will help her get into a better whip position where if I'm leaning forward, it's so much pressure on my shoulder and then I'll stay straight. But if I'm a little bit back, it helps my shoulder more, again, not scientific words, but relax a little bit to where I can help lead more with my elbow than my wrist and then fingertips and snap through.
Excellent. All right. We have just a couple more questions. Jameson Clark says, what's your opinion on the importance when referring to the three tools pitchers have: speed, spin, and location? Like, how would you rank them, or in order of importance, I guess?
Speed, spin, and location. So I would put location first. And then as far as spin or speed, I feel like that would vary based off of what a pitcher just naturally has. I think that some pitchers will naturally be able to throw a little bit harder based off of maybe they already have a really good whip naturally. They're more athletic, they move well. And then also some might have better spin. So I think that it's just always important to pay attention to that first and what works best for each pitcher, and not if she has great spin naturally, because a pitcher will just really have great spin, then play to her strengths. That's not saying that you can't help her to increase speed. And if somebody can throw hard, that's not saying you don't want to help increase her spin, but I would rather play to her strengths. The one strength that everybody needs to have top to bottom, no matter what, is accuracy and being able to hit your spots. If you are not a pitcher who throws strikes, there's so many disadvantages to it. I mean, you're not going to be able to get outs. You're not going to be able to go deep into games because you're going to be throwing too many balls and your pitch count's going to be too high. So not only will you not be able to pitch deep into one game, but you're likely not going to be able to throw two or multiple games in a day, or which is sometimes not good anyway. But if your pitch count is lower, it'll be doable, or multiple pitches or multiple games in a weekend. So to me, accuracy is non-negotiable. You have to be able to throw strikes, because if we're not throwing strikes, then we're not doing our job.
All right. And so obviously accuracy first, and then sometimes I'll describe it as like people always like to say, would you rather have speed or spin? And I always say it's a scale. Like, you can't throw in the Olympics without throwing a 30 mile an hour drop ball. You have to have some kind of speed to that pitch. So there's always a scale to it, obviously.
Definitely.
The speed you have, you can get away with less spin. And the more spin you have, you can get away with having a little slower speed.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see if we got one more question. How do you overcome a team coach who mandates specific mechanics that are counterproductive to what the private coach teaches?
I would just not go to that coach. I mean, I know that it's easier said than done. And at the same time, I also will say, like, if you are on that team, that you need to be coachable and listen to what your coach is going to tell you and try things that he's saying. I don't think that there's just one way to do things. So I think being able to check in with yourself and say, am I being coachable? Am I okay with trying new things? Am I going to give it a chance? Because I think sometimes, like, there will be things that you learn from this person that maybe your current coach doesn't teach or doesn't tell you about, because I think that you have something to learn from everybody. So being as open as you possibly can until you feel like, okay, this isn't working anymore, and we might need to make a change, and it's okay, because it's going to make us happy and be the best for us.
My answer to Jameson was that you probably just say, Amanda Scarborough is my coach, and the other coach probably just shuts up. So that's the easy solution when you are you. Okay. This is the last question. It was kind of a tricky question from Kara Zimdahl. Do you think it's important, or how important do you think to open, or how far does your hips open and or close in the pitch?
Yeah, so it's going to be something that is person by person. Each one of us have a different hip mobility and flexibility in every muscle in our body and in every joint. So some pitchers are going to be able to get really open. Like, I think that I had some pretty good hip flexibility because my knee could be under my hip, all the while my hips were open toward third base. So it's gonna vary. So I would say the best thing that you can do is work on your mobility, work on your hip mobility as well as ankle mobility. Because I think that the more that you can get open and the more that you can also come through and close, like, it's just like, if a door opens a little bit and then closes, it's not going to be very loud. But if a door opens all the way and then slams shut, it's going to be really loud and really powerful. And so we're trying to do that same thing. But sometimes if a door is like just stuck, you can't open it anymore without breaking it. And that's how our hips are too. So just being like, I think that that's probably one thing that goes under coached, and myself included, just because I'm not an expert in it, is just finding ways to get more mobile, to stretch. It's so, so, so important. And we're all built differently and can put our bodies in different positions.
All right. Well, thank you, Amanda. I think that will wrap it up for now. And thanks for joining us. And just a reminder, if you haven't signed up, please check out pitching-angel.com for her Foundation Maximizer course. And you can check me out at Buffalo's Elite Sports Training on my Facebook page. Anything else you want to add?
No, thanks for having me. And thanks to those of you who are attending. I appreciate it. Have a great night.